Ready? All right, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 5, starting verse 43. We'll go through the end of the chapter tonight. Talking about neighbors and enemies. This is part of the teaching that Jesus is doing with his disciples on the Mount. He's gotten away from the multitude and has taken up those who he chose, it says, and it reads as though it's his 12 apostles that he's taken with him. And he's teaching them what we've learned and what we've been seeing is he's teaching them in this lesson, this series of lessons actually, things that are going to be concerning the church, the Lord's churches in the future. Remember, these men are the beginnings of the Lord's church. They're the first members of the Lord's church. He has instituted his church and has brought them in as the first members, and is teaching them. He's teaching them things that they're going to need to know as the leaders of the first churches, as missionaries. When they go out and start other churches, they're going to need to teach these things to others. Particularly, remember, a lot of these things that he's teaching are things that are basically poking the Sadducees in the eye. There are things that they've learned from the Sadducees and the scribes over the years, but he's coming back and, for a lack of a better word, giving the original intent of God and the law on these matters. And the Pharisees have changed things. We've talked about that a lot. They've changed things. They've made things to read what they want. It's just like today when someone comes up with a new translation or a new version of the Bible. Most time it's not a true translation. It's just a commentary. They just went through and took some other version, whether it was the King James or one of the others. There's others that are popular today that they take and they'll revise them, or they'll make a new version of it, they'll call it, but it winds up being just someone's commentary, someone's thoughts on what they think the Bible says, and oftentimes it's not what God intended for us to know out of his word. They leave out whole chapters, whole sentences sometimes, whole words. They change words to mean things that did not mean the same in the original. And so we have to be careful about those things. And so it was the same way with the Pharisees and the scribes in Jesus' day. They had done all these things. The 400 years from the time of the end of the captivity in Babylon to the time Jesus shows up, they've had that much time to basically ruin the Jewish religion. That's what they've done. They've made it a false religion, and when the Messiah comes on the scene, they don't even recognize him, even though he's in their own prophecies. The prophecies in their own books, their own Bibles, and yet they don't even recognize him. And when he starts performing miracles, they recognize that he's a man of God. They see that because only God could do, or a man of God could do what he does. But everything he does to prove that he is the Son of God, they refuse and they rebel against. So he's teaching his apostles here, his disciples, what to expect, what they need to do, how they need to act themselves, how to handle certain situations. And he goes through all this for 3 chapters, chapters 5, 6, and 7. And we've been taking a section at a time. Sometimes we cover 2 sections. Tonight, I don't want to get into chapter 6 tonight. Chapter 6, the first 2 sections there, you have, the first one is on almsgiving, and the second one is on prayer and fasting. And I think those 2 need to be done together if possible. So we will look at those next time. Tonight we're just going to do this short section, so we'll see how long it takes. It may be a little shorter than usual, but we'll see what the Lord has. So in Matthew chapter 5, verse 43, let's start there. Ye have heard that it hath been said. Now, whenever he starts off this way, if you go back to verse 33, where we were at last time, ye have heard that it hath been said. Verse 27, ye have heard that it was said by them of old. Who's he talking about here? He's talking about the writers and the prophets of the Old Testament. He's talking about the law. Moses wrote that God gave to Moses to write, and Moses put it in the Old Testament. And then, of course, you had the prophets after Moses that wrote things. That's who, he says, ye have heard that it hath been said. So they've heard this been taught from those guys, but also they've heard it from the Pharisees. They've heard the Pharisees' version of what they think was said, or what was meant by what the original writers wrote. And Jesus is telling them the intent is not what you think it is. Ye have heard that it hath been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thy enemy. Well, certainly in the Old Testament, and when they were dealing with other nations that were heathen nations, they weren't to love them so much that they would bring them in. They were commanded to pray for them. They were commanded. Remember, Israel was God's nation, God's people in the world at that time. They were supposed to be an example and a witness of God to their neighbors, and they weren't. They kind of stuck to themselves, and partially it's because they misunderstood what God had said, and part of it's because they just rebelled against what God said. And then when they did do what they thought God wanted, they fell into false doctrine, and they fell into following false gods. Because they let their neighbors in, their enemies in, they confused their enemies with their neighbors. Now, some say, well, they've asked the question, who do we consider our neighbor? Well, we've looked at, I believe we looked at a while back, the story of the Good Samaritan. We know that the Good Samaritan there was two other men that came by, a priest and another man that came by and could have taken care of the traveler who was on the side of the road, and he had been robbed and beaten and left for dead, naked. And it was a Samaritan, a man who people back then, and at least the Jews in a way, considered a sinner and someone who was not worthy of anything and was basically trash. Yet this man had some money, and he took the man and doctored him up, gave him some clothes, and put him in an inn for a time till he could come back. And he told the innkeeper, he said, take care of this man while I'm gone, and and here's some money to take care of him. If I owe more, I'll pay you when I come back through. That's the example of someone being a good neighbor. It doesn't matter who you are or who the person is that needs the help. And that's what Christ is about to try to get over to these men here, is even though they may be your enemy, be good to them and treat them as well as possible when possible. Now, again, there are times, and Jesus speaks about this in other places, there are times where your enemy, it's impossible to get along with your enemy. Sometimes people will make it impossible, and it may even be somebody, another church member. It may be maybe someone from another church of like faith. It could be another pastor or another deacon or someone in authority at another church that has made it impossible for you to to show them any kindness other than just to leave them alone. Sometimes that's best. We see people, especially on social media, people get on there and fight and argue. Sometimes it's best just to keep quiet. Just let them go their way and let them do their thing, and you do your thing. You continue preaching the truth. If they're preaching false doctrine, let them go about their way and preach their false doctrine. You just keep preaching the truth. But if you cross paths sometimes, it's nothing wrong with stopping and shaking a hand or giving a hug. That's what he's bringing out here. He says, "But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and the unjust." Now, he says, love your neighbor, or love your enemies, bless them that curse you, and do good unto them that hate you. If a person hates, if they've expressed they don't like you, they hate you, and sometimes people will do it in a nice way. You ever notice that? They'll tell you, they won't tell you that they hate you, or they won't express that they hate you, but you can tell by their actions. They don't want to be around you. They can't stand you, and sometimes it's hurtful. Sometimes you just have to get over it and just, like I said, leave them alone. Let them go their way. But he says, bless them that curse you. If they have cursed you, if they have said bad things about you, don't worry about it. It says, do good to them that hate you. In other words, if you come in contact with them, again, be pleasant to them. Sometimes being pleasant to them will change their attitude. Sometimes being pleasant to them will show them that, hey, this person's not somebody I should be hating. And sometimes people, and we do it all, I think we all do it to some extent. At times there's people that we try to say, well, I don't hate anybody, but yeah, there's probably some people out there, if we stop and think about it, that we really don't like. And that if you want to get down to it, deep down inside, we really hate them. We shouldn't be that way, but that's part of our sinful nature. But even at that, be kind to them when you come across them. Don't start an argument. Don't bring up old issues that you may disagree on. If they approach you about those things, that's a little different. But even then, you can be kind to them. You can say, well, I don't want to talk about that right now, or maybe this is not the place. If you're alone, it might be different, but if you're in a crowd, be pleasant to them. I heard a preacher not long ago say, preaching on the Good Samaritan, he said that there's a time where you shouldn't let people in your home that you disagree with, that have doctrinal differences. It's not what Jesus says, is it? He said, well, that's giving a false opinion of yourself. People are going to think that you agree with them if you let them into your home. Maybe if you let them hang around too long, yes, but if it's for an overnight stay and they're just passing through town and maybe they don't have the money to stay in a motel, or sometimes it's just being cordial. Well, those are the kinds of things that Jesus is talking about here. Does that mean that you have to agree with their doctrine? No, it does not, certainly. And again, you still have to be careful, because there are, if someone's a known thief, you might not want to let them in your house. That would be the exception to the rule. If someone is a womanizer and you're married, you might not want to let them in your house. Someone that's a pedophile, you're not going to let them stay in your home. Those are different situations. But if you just have a difference of opinion on certain doctrines, and maybe even if it's family or a distant friend that is of another denomination, sometimes you got to be careful. If they try to force themselves on you, that's different. Sometimes there's some people that I wouldn't invite to my home because they're constantly trying to force their religion on you. You can't have that. I understand, and I think the Lord understands that too. That's not what He's talking about here. But but even those people, if they're truly in need, maybe you don't let them into your home, but maybe you go and buy them a hotel room for the night. Give them a meal, buy them a meal, whatever. Even though they're your enemy, and maybe they're even the enemy of the Lord, still take care of them if possible. He says that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. In other words, be a good witness of your Father in heaven. For if you love them which love you, what reward have you? Do not even the publicans the same? It's kind of like when you're popular in school and you only care about the other ones that are popular in school. What kind of witness is that? Okay, so you like all the rich kids, big deal. But if you step up and help that one poor kid that's not popular, how's that going to look? Same way in life. If you get a little extra, or even if you don't have a little extra, if you can provide a meal for somebody that's passing through and needs some help, stop and help them change a flat tire, if need be. I understand today we have to be very careful about these things, especially when it's people we don't know, because there is so much mischief out there in the world and so much evil out there. You never know when somebody has purposely given himself a flat tire and is waiting to prey on someone that stops for them. That happens. Be careful about that. But if it's somebody you know, even if it's your enemy, stop and help them. For if you love them which love you, what reward have you? It's easy to love those that love you. But what about those that hate you? Do you love them? And if you salute your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not even the publicans so? So what big deal is it if you give a salute to if you're passing, you're meeting somebody on the street and it's somebody you're good friends with and you wave at them? It's a popular thing here in many places. If two cars are meeting and the people know each other, they always wave at each other. Do you wave at people you don't know? Well, we've gotten the habit of doing it, especially here locally. We see people coming in and out of the King's Edition area neighborhood here. We make a point to wave at people, whether we know them or not. Most of the people we don't know. Even around town, you do the same thing. You go to the post office. Somebody, you go to the post office and you approach the door at the same time as someone else. Hold the door open for them. Well, that person's, they're Catholic or they're Pentecostal, or I don't want anything to do with them. They don't matter. Even though they're maybe the enemy of you and maybe they're the enemy of God. He says, hold the door open for them. He says, be kind to them. Why? Because we never know when it may persuade them to the truth. He says, do not even the publicans so. The publicans, the tax collectors. Then lastly, in verse 48, he says, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. Now, we think, well, we can't be perfect. We're sinners. That's true. But we're to be examples of Christ, are we not? And how do we do that? We act like Christ. We act like Christians. We don't just carry the name Christian, but we act like it. How do we do that? Well, we love our neighbors and our enemies the same. Does the neighbor next door to you that you're good friends with, do you love them, or do you love them like maybe you got a neighbor that's annoying and you don't care much about? Would you still help them as much as you would the neighbor next door to you that you're friends with? You should. As God's people, and especially those of us that are part of the Lord's churches, we should be a good witness for our Lord in this life. And part of that being a good witness is not just preaching the truth every time we get in the pulpit, and not just preaching the truth when people ask us out there in public. If someone asks us what we believe, or if we are sharing the gospel with someone, that in itself is a show of love, is it not? To a person that's the enemy. And we think, well, how are they the enemy if we're trying to, well, they're not a child of God, are they? At least not yet. They may be at some point after you share the gospel with them. The Lord may use that to save them. But we need to be careful. There's a lot of hatefulness going on, a lot of discord being sown between the Lord's churches today, and even in the Lord's churches today. A lot of hate being spread, and a lot of it comes about because one or both sides have lost their love for each other, and not just because they're no longer in agreement, but even as enemies. They can't love each other. That doesn't mean that because, that doesn't mean that it's someone who has broken fellowship with us, or someone who we can't fellowship with because of their doctrine. That doesn't mean that we loving them doesn't mean we have them come in and preach for us. That's not what he's talking about. But if they were traveling through town, would you give them a hand? Would you feed them a meal? Would you give them a place to sleep for the night? Whether it's in your home or it's providing them a hotel room? Would it, it's pretty hypocritical if we don't. We need to remember that. Now, understand, I'm not thinking of anybody in particular here. This is just in general. But there, we need to be careful. We need to be a good steward of what the Lord has given us. Part of being a good steward is if we've got extra, if someone needs help, we help them. If we need help, and that's another thing. People today, we think about people being greedy with their money, but people are greedy with their lack of money too sometimes. They want more, and they want what everybody else has got. And they see somebody that's got a little bit, and they begin to pretend like they don't have anything, or they pretend like, oh, well, we need help, and yet they're too lazy to go get a job. Do we help people like that? Maybe for a time, and maybe we help them for a time and we encourage them, but there has to come a point in time where they got to help themselves too. If you see a person that's, we see, especially over across the river in Portsmouth, all the homeless people are over there, and I don't know their situations. You look at some of them, you're like, why can't you work a job? There's people that are missing limbs and can't hardly walk, and they're working at Walmart and Kroger and places like that. Maybe they have a valid reason. I don't know, but I know in other places I've lived, people I've come across like that. There's no reason at all why they couldn't be working a job, and they're just there for a handout. That's all they're there for. Be careful of those, because people will, even though they're in need, or say they're in need, or they look like they're in need, they're really not. They're refusing to help themselves. So that's the other side of this, okay? So again, if someone truly needs help, we need to help them. Next time, we'll start with chapter 6. Again, we're going to try to do the first two sections together. The first section, verses 6 through 4. Oh, sorry, verses 1 through 4, is on almsgiving, and then 5 through 18 is about prayer and fasting. We'll try to go through those together because I think we'll see that those kind of fit together, and so that's all we have.